Elle dînait seule le jour de son anniversaire. Aucun appel, aucun cadeau, seulement le silence, jusqu'à ce qu'un homme s'arrête devant elle et dise « Je suis ce que ton père a demandé d'apporter ». What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. This will be the best story you'll hear this week. If this story moves you, become a premium listener. There are even deeper, more intense and secret romances waiting for you. Click Become a Member now and listen to the best exclusive stories for a low price. Access the link in the description or in the pinned comment. From the window of his office on the top floor of the Mitchell building, Andrew Mitchell Adams contemplated the bustling Fifth Avenue with a distant gaze. The 50 floors separating him from the ground seemed insignificant compared to the abyss he felt in his chest. The sun was beginning to set, painting New York City's horizon with orange hues that contrasted with the gray concrete of the skyscrapers. In his hands, he held the invitation to his own wedding, printed on Italian paper with golden letters. Andrew and Emily, said the elegant card, announcing the union of two of the country's most powerful families. At 34, Andrew was the youngest man to appear on the list of American billionaires, heir to the Mitchell Group, a conglomerate that spanned from construction to technology. He had multiplied his family's fortune with shrewd investments in the financial market and promising startups. His name was synonymous with success, power, and influence. However, at that moment, he felt like a mere pawn in a chess game, moved by invisible hands deciding his fate. The marriage to Emily Vanderbilt was scheduled for a week from then, a union meticulously planned by his father, Richard Mitchell, and the Vanderbilt patriarch Theodore. "Together we'll be unbeatable in the market," was what his father had said when announcing the arrangement, as if he were talking about a business merger, not his own son's future. Emily was beautiful, educated, and refined, with a degree in international relations from the Sorbonne. She spoke 5 languages and moved effortlessly in New York high society circles. She was the perfect daughter-in-law for the Mitchell dynasty. The problem was that Andrew didn't love her. He had never had the chance to truly know her beyond formal family meetings and business dinners where they exchanged only pleasantries. Andrew's phone vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from his mother, Elizabeth Mitchell. "Son, don't forget dinner with the Vanderbilts tonight. It's important that you and Emily spend more time together before the big day." Andrew sighed, putting the invitation in the drawer of his mahogany desk. He looked at his watch. He had only 2 hours to prepare for another formal meeting with his future wife. While his driver, John, drove the armored Mercedes through New York's congested streets, Andrew wondered how he had reached that point. Since childhood, he had been prepared to take over the family business. He had studied at the best schools, frequented the most exclusive environments, built valuable connections. His entire life had been shaped for success, a success defined by others, not by himself. "We've arrived, sir," announced John, parking in front of Le Bernardin, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. In the restaurant's private room, the Vanderbilts were already waiting for him. Theodore, a man with grey hair and imposing posture, stood up to greet him with a firm handshake. Beside him, his wife, Catherine, an elegant woman with discreet yet valuable jewelry, smiled cordially. And then there was Emily, wearing a navy blue dress that highlighted her delicate silhouette. "Andrew, I'm glad you could come," said Emily, offering her face for a formal kiss. During dinner, Theodore and Richard discussed the details of the ceremony that would unite not only their children, but also their empires. They talked about the guests, influential politicians, businessmen, celebrities, as if they were organizing a corporate event. "Emily has been working tirelessly on the preparations," commented Catherine, looking proudly at her daughter. "She wants everything to be perfect." Emily smiled timidly. For a brief moment, Andrew noticed something in her eyes, a kind of resignation that he knew well, as he saw the same in his own reflection every morning. "And you, Emily, are you excited?" "About the wedding?" asked Andrew, trying to establish a genuine connection for the first time. Emily seemed surprised by the question. "Of course," she responded automatically. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "although I prefer more intimate ceremonies." That small confession, so simple and honest, caught Andrew by surprise. It was the first time Emily had expressed a personal opinion, something that wasn't aligned with her parents' expectations. "Me too," he admitted, feeling an unexpected complicity. The rest of the dinner proceeded as usual, with conversations about business and social formalities. But that brief moment of sincerity remained in Andrew's mind as he returned to his apartment in the penthouse of one of the most exclusive buildings on the Upper East Side. The next morning, Andrew was awakened by a call from his assistant, Deborah. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm calling to confirm your schedule for today at 10 a.m. meeting with the Chinese investors, at noon, lunch with the governor, at 3 p.m., fitting for your wedding suit, and at 7 p.m., the Vanderbilt Foundation charity cocktail." The mention of Emily's family foundation reminded him that he knew very little about his future wife's philanthropic work. In fact, he knew only the basics about Emily, what appeared in magazines and what their parents mentioned in formal conversations. During the suit fitting, as the tailor adjusted the measurements of the morning coat he would wear at the ceremony, Andrew received an unexpected message from Emily. "Can we meet today before the cocktail? There's something I'd like to show you." Intrigued, Andrew responded affirmatively. A few hours later, his car stopped in front of a discreet cafe in the West Village, far from the sophisticated environments they usually frequented. Emily was already waiting for him at a table in the back, dressed simply, almost unrecognizable without the designer clothes she normally wore. "Thank you for coming," she said, seeming nervous. "I know it's unusual for us to meet like this, without our families." "I confess I'm curious," replied Andrew, sitting across from her. Emily hesitated for a moment, then opened her purse and took out a book with a simple cover. "This is something I wrote," she explained, sliding the object across the table. "A novel. I've never shown it to anyone in my family. They wouldn't understand." Andrew picked up the book, surprised. On the cover it read, "Beyond Appearances," and below the title the pseudonym E.V. Sanders. "You're a writer?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "I try to be," replied Emily with a shy smile. "I published this book independently 6 months ago. Almost no one knows it's me." Andrew flipped through the pages, noticing the dedications and acknowledgements. There was no mention of the Vanderbilt family, only friends identified by initials. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, intrigued. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "Because in a week we'll be husband and wife, and I think you deserve to know who I really am, not just the Emily that our parents created for the cameras and social events, and also because—" she paused, as if looking for courage. "Because I need to know if there will be room for my dreams in our marriage." Emily's question hung in the air like a persistent echo. Andrew stared at the book in his hands, then raised his eyes to the woman in front of him, a stranger who would soon be his wife. For the first time, he was truly observing her, not as the Vanderbilt heiress or as a piece in the corporate chess game, but as Emily, a woman with her own dreams. "Are you talented?" he asked, trying to buy time while processing this unexpected revelation. A hesitant smile appeared on Emily's lips. "I don't know, maybe. The book sold only 200 copies, but I received some positive reviews on literary blogs." She nervously fidgeted with the napkin. "It's not about commercial success, you know. It's about having a voice, creating worlds, expressing what I feel." Andrew opened the book to a random page and silently read a paragraph. It was a sensitive description of a character who felt trapped by others' expectations, something he knew well. "I'll read it," he promised, putting the book in the inner pocket of his jacket. As for the question about whether there would be room for her dreams in their marriage, he simply didn't know how to answer. His own marriage had never been presented to him as a space for dreams or personal desires, but as a strategic alliance, a business like any other. The rest of the meeting proceeded with a surprisingly pleasant conversation. Emily talked about the authors she admired, while Andrew shared childhood stories he had never told anyone. For a brief moment, they forgot about the Mitchells and the Vanderbilts, about expectations and appearances. They were just two people, discovering commonalities. When they said goodbye to prepare for the charity cocktail, something had changed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of a friendship, of a mutual respect that didn't exist before. That night, after the cocktail, Andrew sat in the leather armchair in his personal office and opened Emily's book. He began reading, without great expectations, just out of courtesy. 3 hours later, he had finished reading, completely absorbed in the story of a young woman who struggled to find her own identity amid family pressures. There was talent in Emily's words, a sensitivity that surprised him. And more disturbing still, there was a deep understanding of how it felt to be trapped in a life that others had chosen, the same invisible prison in which he himself lived. The following days were a whirlwind of wedding-related commitments. Fittings, meetings with wedding planners, interviews for celebrity magazines. Andrew and Emily barely spoke during these events, always surrounded by family members, advisors, and photographers. On Thursday, 3 days before the ceremony, Andrew was in his office at the company when he received a call from Emily. "Did you read it?" she asked without preamble. "I did," he replied. "It's very good, Emily. You have a gift." Silence on the other end of the line, then a deep breath. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." "Why use a pseudonym?" asked Andrew, genuinely curious. "Because my parents never supported my writing. For them, literature is a teenage pastime, not a career for the Vanderbilt heiress." She paused. "Andrew, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you accept this marriage? Did you have a choice?" The question caught him off guard. No one had ever questioned his acceptance of the marriage arrangement. Everyone simply assumed that he, as the obedient and responsible son, would fulfill his role in the Mitchell dynasty. I guess I never considered having a choice," he finally admitted. "Since I was young, I was taught that my life belongs to the family, to the company, to the Mitchell legacy. Marrying you is just another responsibility. How do you feel about that?" Andrew hesitated. It was the first time someone cared about his feelings on the matter. "Honestly, sometimes I feel like an actor playing the role of Andrew Mitchell, never being able to be just Andrew." The conversation continued for almost an hour, the most sincere they had ever had. When they hung up, Andrew felt strangely light, as if he had removed a small part of the weight he carried on his shoulders. On Friday night, the eve of the wedding, the traditional bachelor party was held at the Mitchell Mansion in Westchester. The huge garden had been transformed into an open-air hall, with white tents, decorative lights hanging from century-old trees, and an orchestra playing classical music. The guests, the cream of American society, circulated through the space, champagne glasses in hand, talking about politics, business, and of course speculating about the value of the prenuptial contract that had certainly been signed. Andrew observed everything from a distance, leaning against one of the columns. On the veranda, he wore an impeccable tuxedo but felt uncomfortable, as if the clothes were a few sizes too small. His father approached, a Cuban cigar between his fingers. "Tomorrow's the big day, son," said Richard, patting his shoulder. "The Mitchell Vanderbilt Group will be the greatest business power in North America. You made the right choice." "I didn't choose anything, Dad," thought Andrew, but limited himself to nodding with a forced smile. Across the garden, Emily was talking with a group of women, including her mother. She wore a simple white dress, her brown hair tied in an elegant bun. She seemed calm, but Andrew, who was beginning to know her better, noticed the tension in her shoulders, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. As the night progressed, the two fiancés circulated separately, fulfilling their social obligations. It was only when most of the guests had already left that Andrew found Emily alone in the winter garden, a more secluded area of the property. "Tired?" he asked, offering her a glass of sparkling water. "Exhausted," she admitted, accepting the drink. Smiling hurts after a few hours. They laughed together, sharing that small complicity. "Andrew," said Emily after a moment of silence, "there's something I need to tell you before tomorrow." The serious tone in her voice alarmed him. "What is it? Are you having doubts?" "It's not that." She bit her lower lip, clearly nervous. "It's something about me, something personal that I think you should know before we get married." At that moment, they were interrupted by Catherine Vanderbilt, who appeared at the door of the winter garden. "Emily, dear, the photographers from People magazine want some photos of you with the bridesmaids." Emily gave Andrew an apologetic look. "We'll talk later," she murmured, following her mother. But later didn't come. The rest of the evening was filled with more social commitments, speeches, and presentations. When Andrew finally managed a moment alone, it was already past midnight, and Emily had been taken home by her parents, following the tradition that the bride and groom shouldn't see each other on the eve of the wedding. Lying in his bed, unable to sleep, Andrew thought about what Emily wanted to tell him. Was it something serious? Was she sick? Or perhaps she had decided she didn't want to go through with the wedding. Surprisingly, this last possibility didn't leave him relieved, as it would have a few weeks ago. Now the idea of not marrying Emily caused him a strange uneasiness, not because he feared his father's reaction or the consequences for the business, but because, somehow that he couldn't explain, he had begun to care about her. The wedding day dawned sunny, a perfect spring Saturday. St. Patrick's Cathedral had been decorated with thousands of white and gold orchids. Security guards controlled access, keeping away curious onlookers and unauthorized press. Inside the sacristy, Andrew adjusted his bow tie, observed by his father and his best man, Richard, a childhood friend who managed the international division of the Mitchell Group. "Nervous?" asked Richard, serving him a finger of whiskey. "Not exactly," replied Andrew. What he felt wasn't nervousness, but a growing curiosity about what Emily wanted to tell him and, more surprisingly, a genuine expectation about what their life together would be like. The ceremony proceeded with the perfection expected of an event of that magnitude. Hundreds of guests occupied the cathedral pews, while strategically positioned cameras transmitted every detail to the family's social networks and to the television channels that had acquired the image rights to the wedding of the year. When Emily entered, led by her father, a collective sigh ran through the church. Her dress, an exclusive creation by one of the country's most renowned designers, combined sophistication and delicacy. Andrew, who awaited her at the altar, felt something unexpected when he saw her walking toward him, a mixture of admiration and a strange, protective feeling he had never experienced before. The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed, and the bishop declared them husband and wife. Everything happened according to the script, meticulously planned by the advisors of the two families. On the cathedral steps, they posed for dozens of photographers, displaying rehearsed smiles that hid the complexity of what they truly felt. The reception was held at the Plaza, a historic hotel converted into an event space. Under a huge climate-controlled tent in the garden, 500 selected guests celebrated the union that, according to Forbes, created a business empire valued at more than $40 billion. For hours, Andrew and Emily circulated among the guests, thanking them for their presence, posing for photos and hearing the same comments about how they formed a perfect couple. It was almost midnight when they finally could sit down, exhausted, at a more secluded table. "We survived," commented Andrew, discreetly loosening his tie. Emily smiled, a genuine smile that contrasted with the studied expressions she had displayed throughout the day. "Almost. We still have to dance the waltz and cut the cake. And after that? Then we escape to our honeymoon in the Hamptons, where we can finally breathe." The mention of the honeymoon brought back to Andrew's mind the interrupted conversation. From the previous night, what did Emily want to tell him? He hadn't had the opportunity to ask during the frantic day they had. As if reading his thoughts, Emily lightly touched his arm. "About yesterday. Can we talk when we're alone at the hotel?" Andrew nodded, curious and a little apprehensive. Something in her tone of voice suggested that the matter was serious. After the waltz, the cake cutting, and the traditional shower of rice, the couple finally could leave the party. A limousine awaited them to take them to the St. Regis, the luxury hotel where they would spend the night before heading to the Hamptons the next morning. In the car, a comfortable silence settled between them. Emily had changed from the voluminous wedding dress to a simpler model, and Andrew observed her profile as she looked out the window, the city lights reflecting on her face. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Emily turned to face him. "About how strange all this is. We've known each other for years, but we only really started talking a week ago, and now we're husband and wife." "It's an unusual beginning," agreed Andrew. "Do you regret it?" she asked in such a low tone that he almost didn't hear. Andrew thought for a moment. "No," he answered honestly. "A week ago I probably would have said something different, but now I don't regret it." A small smile appeared on Emily's lips. "Neither do I." At the hotel, they were greeted with champagne and rose petals scattered throughout the room. As soon as they were alone, Emily asked for a few minutes and headed to the suite's bathroom. Andrew took the opportunity to get rid of his jacket and shoes, sitting on the edge of the king-size bed covered with a silk comforter. When Emily returned, she had changed her dress for a satin robe. She sat next to him, visibly nervous. "What? Did you want to tell me yesterday?" asked Andrew gently. Emily took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Remember, when you asked me why I chose to write under a pseudonym? Yes, you said your parents didn't support it. That's true, but there's more." She paused. "I grew up in an extremely controlled environment. My parents, especially my father, always decided everything in my life, where I would study, who my friends would be, what career I would pursue. Writing was my form of rebellion, the only space where I could be myself." Andrew nodded, understanding that feeling perfectly. "But that's not all I want you to know." Emily looked directly into his eyes. "Andrew, I've never been with anyone before." It took Andrew a few seconds to understand what she meant. "You mean—" "Yes." Emily lowered her gaze, her cheeks blushing slightly. "I'm a virgin." The revelation caught Andrew completely by surprise. Emily was 28, successful, had traveled the world. The idea that she had never been intimately involved with anyone seemed almost inconceivable in the circles they lived in. "Not because I'm religious or have made some kind of vow," she continued quickly. "It was more a combination of circumstances. The constant vigilance of my parents, then studies abroad at all-girls schools, and when I returned to the US, well, I think I developed a fear of intimacy. Intimacy means vulnerability, and I was always taught never to show weakness." Andrew absorbed the information in silence. That confession revealed much more about Emily than the simple fact itself. It showed a woman who, despite all appearances of perfection and control, carried deeply human insecurities and fears. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked softly. "Because I didn't want you to find out in the moment, and because I want to start our marriage with honesty." She hesitated. "I'm nervous, Andrew. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to—" Andrew took her hand, interrupting her. "Emily, we don't need to do anything tonight, or any night until you feel completely comfortable." Her eyes widened in surprise. "But the marriage is our marriage," he said firmly. "Not our parents, not the magazines, not the shareholders. Ours, and we can define our own rules." The words came spontaneously, but as he uttered them, Andrew realized that he believed them. For the first time since the marriage arrangement had been announced, he felt that he had some control over his own destiny. Emily looked at him with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured. "I didn't expect—" "That I would be understanding," completed Andrew with a light smile. "I confess I'm also surprised at myself." They laughed together, and the tension in the air visibly diminished. Emily proposed that they open the champagne bottle that awaited them in a silver bucket. Sitting on the luxurious suite sofa, they talked for hours, sharing childhood stories, abandoned dreams, and small rebellions against their family's expectations. It was almost dawn when they finally lay down, side by side in the enormous bed without touching, but somehow closer than they had ever been. "You know what's strange?" commented Emily, her eyes already closed. "For the first time, I feel like I can be myself with someone." Andrew smiled in the dim light. "I feel the same way." They woke up a few hours later to a knock on the door, breakfast being served, followed by a call from the concierge informing them that the helicopter to the airport would be ready in an hour. The honeymoon in the Hamptons proceeded at a surprisingly pleasant pace, away from the watchful eyes of their families and the Press Andrew and Emily discovered a comfort in each other's company that neither had expected. They walked along deserted beaches, talked for hours during candlelit dinners, and at night they slept in separate beds in the luxury cottage, respecting the space Emily needed. On their last night on the island, sitting on the veranda watching the sea under the moonlight, Emily rested her head on Andrew's shoulder, a simple gesture that symbolized the trust growing between them. "What will it be like when we return?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper so as not to disturb the peace of the moment. Andrew knew exactly what she meant. In New York, they would again be under the scrutiny of their families, social and business obligations, everyone's expectations about what a marriage between the Mitchells and the Vanderbilts should be. "It will be different," he answered honestly, "but we can create our own space, our own world within that world." Emily raised her face to look at him. "Promise?" "I promise," said Andrew, surprising himself with the firmness of his own voice. At that moment, without either of them fully realizing it, something had changed between them. What had begun as a marriage of convenience was slowly transforming into something more authentic, a partnership based on mutual understanding and respect. 2 weeks after returning from the Hamptons, Andrew and Emily were beginning to establish a routine as a couple. They had moved into a duplex penthouse on the Upper East Side, chosen by Richard Mitchell, but which both were gradually making truly their own. Emily had created a small office in one of the rooms where she spent a few hours each day working on her new novel, while Andrew dedicated himself to managing the businesses, now expanded by the merger with the Vanderbilt companies. On Friday, Catherine Vanderbilt called Emily to announce that she would organize a welcome dinner for the couple at her mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. "Nothing too formal, dear, just some close friends to celebrate your return," she assured. Emily knew, however, that in her mother's social language, nothing too formal meant at least 50 people and a meticulously planned event. "Your mother is excited," commented Andrew when Emily hung up the phone with a sigh. "She loves any opportunity to showcase the new family arrangement," replied Emily, sitting next to him on the living room sofa. "But I confess I would prefer something quieter. We haven't had time to breathe since the wedding." Andrew put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural in recent days. "We can go for a few hours and then discreetly escape." Emily smiled, leaning against him. "I like your escape plan." The dinner at the Vanderbilt mansion was more crowded than expected. Besides the close friends promised by Catherine, the event included influential politicians, businessmen from Theodore's circle, and celebrities who made a point of being seen at elite New York parties. Andrew and Emily circulated through the main hall, talking with guests and posing for occasional photos. Despite the social smile she maintained on her face, Emily felt uncomfortable. That world of appearances and superficial conversations, which she had previously accepted as a natural part of her life, now seemed increasingly artificial after the moments of genuine intimacy she had shared with Andrew. "I need some air," she whispered to her husband after a particularly tedious conversation with a senator and his wife. "I'm going to the conservatory." Andrew nodded, squeezing her hand lightly before letting go. "I'll meet you there in a few minutes." The Vanderbilt mansion's conservatory was a tranquil space, an elegant greenhouse filled with rare orchids and exotic plants, softly illuminated by decorative lanterns. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders diminish as she moved away from the buzz of the party. "Em?" The male voice, calling her by the nickname she hadn't heard in years, made Emily turn abruptly. At the entrance to the conservatory, a man of approximately 30 was observing her with a hesitant smile. He wore a well-cut suit, but had a relaxed air, with dark hair a little longer than would be considered appropriate in the formal circles of the Vanderbilts. "Ryan," she exclaimed, recognizing him immediately. "What are you doing here?" Ryan Matthews approached, his green eyes shining with joy. "I returned to the States 2 weeks ago. Your mother invited me to dinner when she heard I was in New York." Emily couldn't contain a genuine smile. Ryan had been her best friend during adolescence. Before he moved to California to study film, they had gradually lost contact over the years, but the memories of the moments they shared remained vivid in her mind. It's been so long. It must be, what, 8 years? 9, he corrected, studying her face as if he wanted to memorize every detail. You haven't changed at all, Em. Neither have you, she replied, realizing it was true. Ryan had the same sincere smile, the same relaxed posture that had always contrasted with the rigidity of the environment in which she grew up. Except for the wedding ring, he observed, indicating with a gesture the ring on her finger. Congratulations. I saw the photos in the magazines, but I wanted to congratulate you in person. Thank you, said Emily, feeling strangely embarrassed. And you? What have you been doing all these years? Ryan told her that he had established himself in Los Angeles, where he directed independent documentaries. His most recent work, about indigenous communities in the Amazon, had gained recognition at international festivals. I'm in New York to finalize some filming, he explained. I'll stay for a month, maybe more. As they talked, reminiscing about stories from adolescence and catching up on the lost years, Emily felt a bittersweet nostalgia. Ryan represented a simpler time in her life, before her parents' expectations became such a heavy weight on her shoulders. I always knew you would be a writer, commented Ryan, when she mentioned her book published under a pseudonym. I remember reading your hidden stories during math classes. Emily laughed, recalling how they exchanged notebooks under the desks, away from the vigilant eyes of the teachers. You were always my first reader, and your biggest fan, he added with a warm smile. It was at that moment that Andrew entered the conservatory. Emily immediately noticed a subtle change in his expression when he saw Ryan. Not exactly jealousy, but a kind of cautious curiosity. Andrew, she said, making the introductions. This is Ryan Matthews, a childhood friend. Ryan, my husband, Andrew Mitchell. The two men shook hands, assessing each other with that peculiar masculine attention. Congratulations on the wedding, said Ryan cordially. Emily deserves all the happiness in the world. I completely agree, replied Andrew, positioning himself beside his wife with a naturalness that surprised Emily. The conversation continued for a few minutes, with Ryan telling about his work in Los Angeles and Andrew showing genuine interest in his film projects. Emily observed the interaction with a strange feeling of displacement, as if two completely different worlds of her life were colliding. When Catherine appeared, requesting the couple's presence for a photo with some important guests, Ryan said, "Goodbye," promising to keep in touch during his stay in New York. So that's the famous Ryan, commented Andrew as they walked back to the main hall. Emily looked at him in surprise. Famous? His name appeared in the acknowledgements of your book, 2RM Who Believed in My Stories When I Didn't Believe in Them Myself, quoted Andrew from memory. Emily felt her face warm. You have a good memory. When something interests me, I pay attention to the details, he replied simply. The rest of the party proceeded without incidents, but Emily couldn't stop thinking about the reunion with Ryan. It wasn't just the nostalgia that disturbed her, but something he had said as they were saying goodbye low enough that only she could hear. We need to talk in private. It's important. The next morning, as they had coffee on the penthouse terrace, Andrew mentioned that he would need to travel to Washington, D.C. for 2 days for meetings with government representatives. Any problem if I don't go with you? Asked Emily. I'm at a crucial part of my novel and would like to take advantage of the weekend to write. Of course not, he replied. Actually, I was thinking of suggesting that you stay. There'll be boring business meetings, nothing that justifies interrupting your work. Emily smiled, grateful for the understanding. In recent days, Andrew had shown genuine respect for her writing, going so far as to read the chapters she completed and offering sincere feedback. On Sunday afternoon, with Andrew still in Washington, Emily received a message from Ryan, inviting her for coffee. After a moment of hesitation, she accepted. There was something in the tone of urgency in his words at the party that had aroused her curiosity. They met at a discreet cafe in Chelsea, far from the places frequented by the New York elite where they might be recognized. Ryan was already waiting for her at a table in the back, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. I remembered you prefer cappuccino, he said when she sat down. I still do, smiled Emily, touched by the gesture. "So what was so important that we needed to talk in private?" Ryan hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. "It's about your maternal grandmother, Cecilia." Emily frowned, confused. Her grandmother, Cecilia, had died more than 15 years ago when she was still a teenager. "What about her? Did you know she left a separate will, one your parents never mentioned?" "What are you talking about, Ryan?" "I found it by chance. I was researching traditional New York families for a documentary and came across public records of an archived lawsuit." He took a folder from his backpack and slid it across the table. "Your grandmother left a considerable fortune specifically for you, Emily. A fortune that your parents have kept secret all these years." With trembling hands, Emily opened the folder and began to read the documents. According to the papers, Cecilia Vanderbilt, her maternal grandmother, had left her granddaughter an inheritance separate from the family patrimony, properties in upstate New York, shares in international companies, and a Swiss bank account that, according to the most conservative estimates, were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "This can't be true," murmured Emily, feeling her heart accelerate. "My parents would have told me." "Would they really?" questioned Ryan gently. You always told me how your parents controlled every aspect of your life. An inheritance of this size would have given you total financial independence. They would lose control." Emily continued reading, coming to a court document that showed how Theodore and Catherine had assumed the administration of the assets as guardians until Emily completed 30 years of age, an age she would reach in less than 6 months. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked, feeling simultaneously grateful and disturbed. "Because you deserve to know the truth before the deadline expires, and because—" Ryan paused, looking at her intensely. "Because I care about you, Em. I always have." Emily left the cafe with her mind in turmoil. The folder with the documents weighed in her purse like lead, but the weight in her heart was even heavier. Throughout her life, she had believed that her financial dependence on her parents was a natural condition, part of the tacit agreement of belonging to the Vanderbilt family. Discovering that she owned a fortune of her own, deliberately hidden by those she trusted most, shook the foundations of her reality. Walking distractedly through the streets of Chelsea, Emily barely noticed the path she was taking. Ryan's words echoed in her mind, along with the implications of that revelation. If everything was true and the documents seemed authentic, in a few months she would become an independently wealthy woman. She would no longer need her parents' approval for her decisions, could dedicate herself entirely to writing without financial concerns, could— The thought was interrupted when Emily realized that she didn't exactly know where she was. Absorbed in her reflections, she had moved away from the busier streets and now found herself in a less familiar area of the neighborhood. She consulted her phone to orient herself and decided to call a rideshare to take her home. While waiting on the corner, she noticed that the sky was rapidly darkening, one of those summer storms that suddenly form in New York. The first heavy drops began to fall when a car stopped beside her. It wasn't the driver she was expecting, but a black Porsche that she immediately recognized. The window lowered, revealing Andrew's concerned face. "Emily? What are you doing here in the rain?" Surprised, Emily approached the vehicle. "Andrew, I thought you wouldn't return from Washington until tonight. The last meeting was cancelled, so I caught an earlier flight," he explained, unlocking the passenger door. "Get in, it's starting to rain hard." Emily hesitated for an instant, the folder with the documents weighing in her hand. She had planned to analyze everything carefully before deciding how to approach the matter with Andrew. But now, confronted with his unexpected presence, she felt strangely relieved. Perhaps she really needed someone with whom to share that disconcerting discovery. Once inside the car, Andrew observed her carefully. "You're pale. Did something happen?" The rain intensified, turning into a curtain of water that isolated the vehicle from the outside world. In that small protected space, Emily felt a sudden desire to open up completely. "I met with Ryan today," she began, carefully observing her husband's reaction. Andrew maintained a neutral expression, only a slight raising of eyebrows betraying his surprise. "Your friend from the party. Yes, he showed me something that has left me quite shaken. Emily opened the folder and handed the documents to Andrew. Apparently, my grandmother Cecilia left me a significant inheritance that my parents have kept secret all these years. As Andrew examined the papers with professional attention, the rain became increasingly heavy, transforming the streets into small streams. The sound of water on the car's roof created a kind of acoustic isolation, as if they were in a world apart. "This seems legitimate," he said finally, returning the documents. "Your grandmother really did leave a considerable fortune for you, with the condition that you would only have access to it upon completing 30 years of age. Or upon getting married," added Emily, indicating a specific clause that she had discovered during her careful reading at the cafe. "Apparently, marriage would also give me immediate right to the inheritance, regardless of age." Andrew's eyes met hers, a sudden understanding passing between them. "That explains why your parents were so anxious about our marriage, and why they never told me about the will," completed Emily bitterly. "They feared that if I knew about the inheritance, before marrying someone of their approval, I could escape their control." Andrew remained silent for a moment, processing the implications. "What do you intend to do with this information?" The question caught Emily by surprise. She had expected indignation, perhaps even immediate suggestions for legal action against her parents. Instead, Andrew seemed genuinely interested in her feelings and intentions. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Part of me wants to confront them immediately, demand explanations. Another part is so hurt that I don't know if I could look them in the eyes right now." "I understand," said Andrew softly. "It's a difficult betrayal to process." Emily felt unexpected tears spring to her eyes. That was exactly it, a betrayal. Not just the hidden fortune, but what it represented. Years of manipulation, of control disguised as protection, of denied choices. Andrew extended his hand, lightly touching her face. "Hey, it's all right. You're not alone in this." At that moment, a deafening noise interrupted the conversation. The impact of something heavy against the car's roof, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Emily screamed, instinctively shrinking back, while Andrew moved with surprising speed, throwing himself over her in a protective gesture. A tree branch, knocked down by the force of the storm, had fallen on the Porsche, breaking part of the windshield. Glass shards scattered throughout the interior of the vehicle, and rain began to enter through the opening. "Are you hurt?" asked Andrew, his body still protecting hers, his face inches from hers. "No, I'm fine," replied Emily, her heart beating wildly in her chest, not just from the fright, but from the sudden proximity. "And you?" Andrew moved slightly, revealing a cut on his forehead where a glass fragment had hit him. Blood slowly trickled down the side of his face. "Andrew, you're bleeding!" exclaimed Emily, instantly forgetting her own problems. "It's nothing serious," he assured, trying to minimize the situation as he sat back in the driver's seat. Emily opened her purse looking for tissues. Finding them, she gently pressed against the cut on Andrew's forehead. "We need to take you to a hospital." "It won't be necessary. It's just a superficial cut," he insisted, but allowed her to tend to the wound. The rain continued to enter through the opening in the windshield, gradually soaking them. The car, with the branch still on the roof, could not be safely moved. "I'll call for help," said Andrew, reaching for his phone. But before he could make the call, the device slipped from his hand, falling into a puddle of water forming on the car floor. Emily couldn't contain a nervous laugh at the absurd situation. "Seems like we're stuck here for a while." Andrew looked at her, a smile slowly forming on his lips, despite the blood and rainwater on his face. "This isn't exactly how I planned our reunion after the trip." The tension broke and they both laughed, a genuine and liberating laugh that alleviated not only the stress of the moment, but also the weight of the earlier revelations. It was strange how, in that precarious situation, with rain entering through the broken windshield and a tree branch trapping them in place, Emily felt strangely safe. "Does your phone still work?" asked Andrew, indicating her purse. Emily checked, but her device had also gotten wet and wouldn't turn on. "Looks like we'll have to wait for the storm to pass or for someone to find us." Andrew nodded, adjusting himself in the seat to minimize contact with the water coming in. The limited space of the sports car meant they were inevitably close, their shoulders touching. "You know," he began after a moment of silence, "when I saw that branch falling, my only thought was to protect you." I didn't think twice. Emily looked at him, noticing something different in his expression, a vulnerability that the always controlled Andrew Mitchell rarely showed. "Why?" she asked softly. Andrew seemed surprised by the question, as if the answer were obvious. "Because you're important to me, Emily. More than I expected you would be when we got married." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was something equally profound, an acknowledgement that what they had built in the last few weeks went beyond the original pragmatic agreement. "You've also become important to me, Andrew," admitted Emily, surprising herself with her own sincerity. "When I discovered the inheritance today, my first thought was how it would affect our relationship." "Affect it how?" he asked, genuinely curious. Emily hesitated, organizing her thoughts. "Well, technically, now I'm as rich as you are. That changes the dynamic, don't you think? Our marriage was arranged partly based on the union of family fortunes, but if I have my own fortune, you wonder if there's still reason for us to remain married," completed Andrew, immediately understanding. "Yes," she admitted, studying his reaction. Andrew took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Emily, regardless of the money, of what your parents or mine expect or how all this began, I want to continue discovering who we are together." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, and Emily felt something awaken within her, not just affection or gratitude, but something deeper that she didn't yet dare to name. Driven by an impulse, she leaned in and touched her lips to his, a soft and hesitant kiss that soon transformed into something more intense. When they separated, both seemed equally surprised by the intensity of the moment. The rain continued to fall around them, but now it seemed more like a protective curtain than a prison. "I think I broke my own rule," commented Emily with a small smile, referring to the tacit agreement of personal space they had established since their wedding night. "Rules exist to be occasionally broken," replied Andrew, his thumb delicately tracing the line of her jaw. The sound of approaching sirens interrupted the moment. Through the rain, they saw the lights of a police car and a fire truck stopping near the damaged Porsche. "Looks like our rescue has arrived," observed Andrew, a touch of disappointment in his voice. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand one last time before the rescuers arrived. "We have time, Andrew, all the time in the world." The firefighters quickly removed the branch and helped them out of the vehicle. A paramedic examined the cut on Andrew's forehead, confirming it wasn't serious but recommending a few stitches as a precaution. Emily insisted on accompanying him to the hospital, remaining by his side throughout the procedure. When they finally arrived home that night, something had changed between them. The accident, so sudden and unexpected, had served as a catalyst, accelerating a connection that was already gradually happening. And while the folder with the inheritance documents rested on the living room table, temporarily forgotten, Emily realized that she had discovered something potentially more valuable than any fortune: the possibility of true love being born from the most unlikely circumstances. The next morning after the accident, Emily woke up with sunlight filtering through the curtains. For the first time since the wedding, she found herself in Andrew's arms, his head resting comfortably on her shoulder. She observed his face relaxed in sleep, the discreet bandage on his forehead where the stitches had been placed. There was a vulnerability in his features that he rarely allowed himself to show when awake. The powerful Andrew Mitchell, always in control, always vigilant. Careful not to wake him, Emily slid out of bed and headed to the kitchen. She prepared fresh coffee and cut some fruit, arranging everything on a tray. When she returned to the bedroom, Andrew was already sitting up in bed, looking at his phone. "Good morning," she said, placing the tray on the nightstand. "How's your head?" Andrew lightly touched the bandage. "A little sore, but nothing serious." "You didn't have to bother with breakfast." "It wasn't a bother," replied Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Actually, it was pleasant." A comfortable silence settled between them as they shared the simple meal. It was Sunday, and neither had scheduled commitments, a rarity in their lives normally filled with social and professional obligations. "What do you want to do today?" asked Andrew, surprising Emily with the unpretentious question. In their weeks of marriage, their days off had been carefully programmed in advance, usually including visits to families or unavoidable social events. "I don't know," she admitted, realizing it had been a long time since she had a truly free day to do what she wanted. "Maybe we could just stay home, read, talk." "Or you could show me more of your work," suggested Andrew. "I'd like to read what you're currently writing." The suggestion caught Emily by surprise. Despite Andrew having shown interest in her first book, she still kept her creative process in a very private sphere, a habit developed after years of writing in secret, away from the critical eyes of her parents. "You really want to read it?" she asked, unable to hide the insecurity in her voice. "Of course," he replied with sincerity. "Your first book impressed me, Emily. You have a genuine gift." Feeling both nervous and strangely moved, Emily got up and went to her office, returning with the laptop where she kept the chapters of her new novel. She settled next to Andrew in bed and hesitantly opened the file. "It's very different from the first one," she warned. "More personal." "I'm eager to know more of that part of you," said Andrew, settling in to read. For the next hour, Emily observed with growing anxiety as Andrew carefully read the pages of her manuscript in progress. It was a story about a woman divided between the world that had been imposed on her and the one she secretly desired, a narrative that, she now realized, reflected much of her own experience. When Andrew finally raised his eyes from the laptop, Emily held her breath, awaiting his verdict. "It's extraordinary," he said simply, but with such conviction that Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. "The way you capture the character's internal conflicts, the language you use to describe her inner world. It's truly impressive, Emily." "Do you really think so?" she asked, surprised by the specific and apparently genuine praise. "I'm certain. In fact." Andrew hesitated, as if carefully considering his next words. "I think you should publish under your own name this time." The suggestion made Emily straighten up instantly. Defensive. "I can't. My parents—" "Your parents no longer control your life," Andrew gently reminded her. "And with the revelation about your inheritance, you'll soon have total financial independence from them." Emily bit her lip, considering the possibility. Publishing with her real name had always been a secret dream, seeing Emily Vanderbilt, now Emily Vanderbilt Mitchell, on the cover of a book, publicly assuming her identity as a writer, but the thought still terrified her. What if it's a failure? What if it embarrasses the families? Andrew took her hand, his fingers naturally intertwining with hers. "First, it won't be a failure. Your talent is undeniable. Second, even if it were, which is highly unlikely, what importance would that have? It's your life, Emily, your voice, your story to tell." There was such conviction in his words that Emily felt something melt within her, a barrier of fear and doubt that she had carried for so many years. Unexpected tears sprang to her eyes. "I never thought that you, of all people, would encourage me to follow a path that goes against our family's expectations," she confessed. An ironic smile appeared on Andrew's lips. "I'm also surprising myself. Lately, it seems you're having a dangerous influence on me, Emily Vanderbilt Mitchell." The use of her full name, said in that affectionate tone, caused a pleasant shiver in Emily. Impulsively, she leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that he returned with equal enthusiasm. When they separated, Andrew held her face between his hands, looking at her intensely. "You know what I think we should do today, besides reading your wonderful manuscript?" "What?" she asked, still a little dazed from the kiss. "I believe that as your unofficial editor and greatest supporter, I should get to know your creative space. That cafe where you met Ryan yesterday, is it a special place for you? A place where you feel inspired?" Emily smiled, surprised by his perceptiveness. "Actually, no, I chose that cafe precisely because no one knows me there, but there is a place where I really feel inspired." "Then that's where we'll go today," decided Andrew, getting up from the bed with renewed energy. 2 hours later, Andrew's driver dropped them off in front of an old building in Greenwich Village. The historic building, with its preserved facade from the early 20th century, housed a small independent bookstore specializing in national literature. A bell tinkled softly when they entered, and the comforting smell of old books and fresh coffee immediately enveloped them. "I've been coming here since adolescence," explained Emily, as she guided Andrew through the narrow corridors formed by tall shelves. "I discovered it by chance when I ran away from an etiquette class. I became friends with the owner, Mr. Jenkins, who let me spend hours reading in the most hidden corners without bothering me." As if summoned by her words, an old man with white hair and thick-framed glasses appeared from behind a bookshelf. His face lit up when he recognized Emily. "Young lady, it's been so long," he exclaimed, opening his arms for a warm hug that Emily returned with genuine affection. "Mr. Jenkins, this is my husband, Andrew," she introduced. "Andrew, this is Henry Jenkins, the guardian of my juvenile literary secrets." "And of some not so juvenile," added the old bookseller with a complicit wink. "Did you know this is where she hid the manuscripts of her first novel? She kept them in that drawer over there." He pointed to an antique piece of furniture in the corner of the store. "She came every Saturday morning to work on them before her parents woke up." Andrew looked at Emily with renewed admiration. "I didn't know you were so determined." "There are many things about me that you still don't know," she replied, a glint of challenge in her eyes that Andrew found unexpectedly attractive. Mr. Jenkins, noticing the exchange of looks between the couple, smiled knowingly. "Oh, your corner is still up there, Emily. The green armchair is still in the same place, waiting for you." Emily guided Andrew to a narrow staircase at the back of the store, which led to a cozy mezzanine. An old, faded green velvet armchair was positioned next to a window that offered a charming view of the inner courtyard, where a century-old tree spread its branches. "This is my refuge," she said, running her hand over the worn fabric of the armchair. "Here I was always just Emily, not the Vanderbilt heiress, not the daughter who needs to meet expectations. Just me with my stories and dreams." Andrew absorbed the environment, noticing the details that made the space special. The shelves, with carefully selected works by American authors, the small wooden table next to the armchair, with marks from coffee cups, the worn pillow that had clearly supported Emily's back during countless hours of reading and writing. "It's perfect," he declared sincerely. "I can imagine you here lost in your own worlds." Emily sat in the armchair, instantly relaxing in the familiar position. "You know what I like most here? The silence. Not a dead silence, but a living silence, full of stories whispering from the pages around." Andrew pulled a nearby stool and sat in front of her. "Tell me more about your new book. What's the story you're trying to tell?" For the following hours, Emily shared not only the details of her novel in progress, but also her inspirations, her fears. As a writer, the difficulties of finding her authentic voice after years of self-censorship. Andrew listened attentively, asking insightful questions that demonstrated a genuine interest, not only in supporting her, but in truly understanding her creative process. "You know what would be perfect for the development of your main character," he suggested at one point. "A trip to Montauk. The atmosphere of the coastal town, the annual literary festival, it could offer an interesting setting for her moment of self-discovery." Emily looked at him in surprise. "That's actually a brilliant idea. The protagonist could participate, so in a writing workshop there, face her insecurities. We could go together," Andrew proposed impulsively. "Spend a week there, you writing, me, well, I could work remotely and explore the town during breaks." "You would do that? Take a week off work just to accompany me on a writing trip?" The incredulity in Emily's voice made Andrew realize how accustomed she was to having her creative interests treated as secondary, as inconvenient pastimes to be tolerated, not celebrated. "Emily," he said seriously, leaning forward to take her hands, "your talent is not a hobby. It's part of who you are, and if it's important to you, then it's important to me." The words, so simple and direct, caused a lump in Emily's throat. For the first time, someone was validating her passion for writing not as a tolerable distraction, but as a legitimate vocation, an essential part of her identity. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to elaborate more at that moment. But Andrew seemed to understand everything that was implicit in that single word. By dusk, They left the bookstore with the promise to return soon. Emily carried a bag with some books that Andrew had insisted on buying for her. Works by contemporary American female authors that Mr. Jenkins had recommended for inspiration. "An incredible day," commented Andrew, as they walked hand in hand along the sidewalk waiting for the driver. "Thank you for sharing this special place with me." Emily squeezed his hand, a simple gesture that now carried a much deeper meaning. "Thank you for wanting to know it." That night, after a quiet dinner, at home, Emily found an envelope on her desk that wasn't there before. Inside, there was a handwritten letter from Andrew. "Emily, today I understood something fundamental about you. Your writing is not just what you do, it's who you are. I promise to do everything in my power to protect and nurture this essential part of you, even when it means going against the expectations of our families or society. I've reserved a house in Montauk for next week. It's a quiet place with an ocean view and a perfect porch for writing. Just the two of us will go. No drivers, no assistants, no social obligations. Just you, me, your stories, and the time needed to let them flourish. With admiration, Andrew." Emily. Read the letter 3 times, each word reverberating deeply in her heart. When she finally fell asleep that night in Andrew's arms, her dreams were populated not by doubts or insecurities, but by possibilities. Possibilities of a life where love and personal fulfillment were not mutually exclusive, where her talent was celebrated instead of hidden, where she could be truly and completely herself. The week in Montauk became a turning point in Emily and Andrew's relationship. Away from the pressures of New York, their family's expectations and social obligations, they discovered a freedom that neither had experienced before. Emily dedicated her mornings to writing, settled on the porch of the rented house overlooking the ocean, while Andrew alternated between remote work and explorations of the historic coastal town, frequently returning with some special find, a rare book from a local bookstore, an exotic fruit from the farmer's market, or simply an interesting story about the residents. In the afternoons, they walked together along the beaches, talking about everything and nothing, discovering hidden corners of the coastal town, and more importantly, discovering each other. At night, they shared dinners in small waterfront restaurants, where no one recognized them as the heirs of the Vanderbilt and Mitchell families, treating them simply as one more couple in love enjoying their vacation. Because that's what they were becoming, a genuinely loving couple. The feeling that had begun to bud between them since the accident in the rainstorm blossomed completely during those days of intimate and uncomplicated coexistence. The marriage that had begun as a business transaction was transforming into a true union, based on mutual respect, admiration, and an increasingly deep affection. On their last day in Montauk, sitting on the sand of Ditch Plains Beach at sunset, Andrew finally asked the question he had been keeping to himself. "What do you plan to do about your grandmother's inheritance?" Emily watched the gentle waves for a moment before answering. "I'm going to claim it, of course. It's my right. And more than that, it was my grandmother's wish." She paused, intertwining her fingers with his. "But I don't want to confront my parents immediately. I want some time to think about how to approach the matter." Andrew nodded, understanding. "Whatever your decision, I'll be by your side." "Thank you," smiled Emily. "You know, I've been thinking, I'd like to use part of the money for something meaningful, something that would make my grandmother Cecilia proud." "What kind of thing?" "A social project, something related to education or literature." Emily hesitated, then continued with growing enthusiasm. "Maybe a foundation that would offer creative writing workshops for young people from underprivileged communities, or scholarships for promising writers who don't have the means to dedicate themselves fully to their art." Andrew's face lit up. "It's a wonderful idea, Emily. In fact, I believe your father mentioned that your grandmother was a teacher before she got married, wasn't she?" "Yes," exclaimed Emily, surprised that he remembered this detail. "She taught literature upstate before she met my grandfather. She always told me how she missed the classroom." Her eyes shone with realization. "It's perfect, isn't it? A way to honor her legacy." "Perfect," agreed Andrew, pulling her closer. "And I know some people who could help legally structure the foundation, ensuring it's managed exactly as you wish." Emily rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a wave of gratitude for having someone by her side who not only supported her dreams, but actively helped to realize them. The next morning, they returned to New York. Reality awaited them, accumulated. Emails, pending business calls, insistent messages from Catherine asking why Emily wasn't responding to her calls. But something had fundamentally changed. The bubble of happiness they had created in Montauk didn't burst upon returning to the city. Instead, they brought it with them, an invisible protection against the pressures of the outside world. 3 days after their return, during breakfast, Andrew made an unexpected suggestion. "What do you think about visiting the Lighthouse Institute this afternoon? I have a meeting with the director at 2 to discuss a possible donation from the Mitchell Group, and I thought you might like to see the place." "The children's home in Queens?" asked Emily, vaguely familiar with the institution that occasionally appeared at charity events. "Yes, actually it's no longer called a children's home but a residential care facility. They do incredible work with children in vulnerable situations." Emily agreed, curious. She had never visited a children's shelter before, and the idea of getting to know the social work that Andrew supported interested her. The Lighthouse Institute occupied a renovated old mansion in Queens, surrounded by a well-kept garden where some children were playing when they arrived. They were greeted by Mrs. Josephine, the director, a black woman in her 60s with a warm smile and perceptive eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Mr. Mitchell, what a pleasure to see you again," she greeted, shaking Andrew's hand firmly. "And this must be your wife. Welcome, Mrs. Mitchell." "Please call me Emily," she insisted, immediately captivated by the woman's welcoming energy. Mrs. Josephine led them on a tour of the facilities, explaining the work done there. The institute currently housed 28 children of different ages, offering not only basic care, but also educational support, psychological assistance, and cultural activities. "Our philosophy is to create an environment as family-like as possible," explained the director, as they walked through a study room where teenagers were doing homework under the supervision of an educator. "Each child has their own rhythm, their own story, their specific needs. We try to respect that individuality." Emily observed everything with growing admiration. The facilities were simple but impeccably clean and organized, decorated with artistic works by the children themselves. Even more impressive was the atmosphere. Despite the difficult stories that certainly inhabited that place, there was a palpable sense of safety and welcome. While Andrew and Mrs. Josephine discussed details about the planned donation in a corner of the library, Emily noticed a girl of approximately 8 years sitting alone at a table, absorbed in a book. She approached silently, curious about what the child was reading with such concentration. "Is it a good book?" she asked gently. The girl raised her face, revealing intelligent dark eyes and a shy smile. "It's the best," she replied. "It's about a girl who discovers she can talk to animals." "Sounds fascinating," commented Emily, sitting in the chair next to her. "My name is Emily. What's yours?" "Lily," replied the girl, partially closing the book but keeping her finger as a page marker, clearly anxious to return to reading. "You really like reading, don't you, Lily?" The child's face lit up. "Yes, I read everything I can. I want to be a writer when I grow up." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. "I'm a writer too," she confessed, as if sharing a precious secret. Lily's eyes widened. "Really? Have you written real books that were published?" "Yes, 1 book so far, and I'm writing the second." "Wow!" exclaimed Lily, completely impressed. "What's it about?" Emily spent the next 20 minutes talking with the girl about stories, characters, and the writing process. Lily, despite her young age, asked surprisingly perceptive questions and shared her own ideas for stories with contagious enthusiasm. "I have a notebook where I write my stories," said the girl. "Do you want to see?" Without waiting for an answer, Lily ran to fetch her treasure, returning minutes later with a simple school notebook carefully decorated with colorful drawings. She handed it to Emily with a mixture of pride and shyness. With reverent care, Emily flipped through the pages, reading excerpts of the stories written in careful, childish handwriting. They were simple tales, but full of imagination and sensitivity. Stories about magical animals, children with superpowers, adventures in distant worlds. In each word, Emily recognized something familiar, that urgent need to create alternative worlds, to escape through imagination, to find meaning through stories. "This is wonderful, Lily," she said sincerely, returning the notebook. "You have a real talent." The girl blushed with pleasure. "Really? No one's ever told me that before." "Well, I'm telling you now, and I'm a professional writer, remember? I know what I'm talking about." Lily hugged the notebook against her chest, her face radiant. At that moment, Andrew approached, having concluded his meeting with the director. "I see you've made a friend," he commented with a warm smile. "Andrew, this is Lily," introduced Emily. "She's a very talented writer." "Is that so?" he replied, sitting down and formally extending his hand to the girl. "It's a pleasure to meet a colleague of my wife's." Lily laughed, delighted with the adult treatment. "The pleasure is mine, sir." "Lily showed me her stories," explained Emily. "They're truly impressive for someone her age. Perhaps you could give her some tips," suggested Andrew, "like a mentor." Lily's eyes widened at the possibility. "You would do that? Teach me to write better?" Emily hesitated for only a second before answering. "I'd love to, if Mrs. Josephine allows it, of course." As if summoned by her name, the director approached. "Allow what?" Emily briefly explained about Lily's interest in writing and her desire to mentor her. "That would be wonderful," approved Mrs. Josephine enthusiastically. "We have volunteers who come to teach music, visual arts, even computer programming. But we've never had anyone to specifically guide those interested in literature." "Actually," said Emily, an idea rapidly forming, "maybe I could do something more structured. A weekly creative writing workshop open to all interested children." Lily's face lit up even more if that was possible. "That would be amazing. Anna and Peter also love writing stories." "It's decided then," smiled Emily, feeling an enthusiasm she hadn't experienced in a long time. On the way back home, Emily remained thoughtful, looking out the car window without really seeing the urban landscape passing by. "What are you thinking about?" asked Andrew, observing her distant expression. "About Lily," replied Emily, "about how her eyes shone when she talked about her stories, about how she felt valued simply because someone took seriously what she creates." She paused. "I was thinking about how different it would have been for me if, as a child, someone had told me that my talent was valuable, that my dreams deserved to be pursued." Andrew took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You can be that person for her, for Lily, and for other children like her." "Yes," agreed Emily, a determination growing inside her. "And not just with occasional workshops. Andrew, I think I've found exactly what I want to do with part of my grandmother's inheritance." In the weeks that followed, as Emily began the creative writing workshop at the Lighthouse Institute, she also worked discreetly with the lawyers, indicated by Andrew to structure her foundation. The project grew and took shape. It would be called the Cecilia Vanderbilt Foundation in honor of her grandmother, and its main mission would be to promote literary education and the development of young writers from underprivileged communities. Emily discovered a passion she didn't know she possessed, that of teaching, of sharing her love for literature, of seeing a child's eyes light up when creating their first successful metaphor or developing a complex character. Lily, in particular, flourished under her guidance, revealing herself to be not only talented but also dedicated and eager to learn. Meanwhile, her relationship with Andrew continued to deepen. The love that had been born from the most unlikely circumstances grew each day, based not on family arrangements or financial interests, but on mutual admiration, respect, and a genuine partnership. Andrew not only supported Emily's projects, but actively participated, offering ideas, resources, and most importantly, his time, occasionally accompanying her to the institute, getting to know the children, reading their stories. 2 months. After the discovery of the inheritance, Emily finally felt ready to confront her parents. She invited Theodore and Catherine for dinner at the penthouse she shared with Andrew, who insisted on being present to support her. The dinner began tensely, with superficial conversations about social events and family businesses. Catherine, as always, dominated the conversation with comments about who had attended the latest charity ball and which marriages were being planned in New York high society. "Speaking of events," she said while savoring dessert, "we need to start planning Emily's 30th birthday party. It will be an important milestone, especially now that she's properly married." Emily exchanged a significant look with Andrew before responding. "Actually, Mom, I already have plans for my birthday. It will be the official launch of the Cecilia Vanderbilt Foundation." Catherine put down her spoon, confused. "The what foundation?" "Antal, educational and cultural foundation that I'm establishing in Grandma's name," explained Emily calmly, observing her parents' expressions. "Financed with the inheritance she left me, the inheritance you never told me about." A heavy silence fell over the table. Theodore visibly paled, while Catherine opened and closed her mouth, unable to formulate an immediate response. "How?" began Theodore finally. "How did I find out?" completed Emily. "Does that matter? What matters is that you hid from me for years something that was legitimately mine by right." "It was for your own good," defended Catherine, regaining her composure. "You were young, impressionable. If you knew about the money, you could make hasty decisions, be manipulated by self-interested people. I was 22 when Grandma died," countered Emily, keeping her voice controlled despite the indignation she felt. "I was a college graduate adult, perfectly capable of making my own decisions. You weren't protecting me, you were controlling me." Theodore cleared his throat, assuming his patriarch posture. "Emily, you don't understand the complexities of managing a fortune of this size. We made the decisions we considered appropriate to preserve your patrimony. And coincidentally, those decisions included keeping me completely dependent on you, financially and emotionally, until I married someone you approved of." Emily looked at Andrew, who remained silent but vigilant by her side. "Fortunately, I ended up marrying someone who truly values me for who I am, not for what I can bring to a business alliance." Catherine threw an irritated look at Andrew. "I see he's already turned you against us." "Don't blame my husband," intervened Emily firmly. "This situation was created entirely by you. Andrew has only been supportive and honest with me, two qualities that you clearly didn't prioritize in our family relationship." A heavy silence settled again. Finally, Theodore spoke, his voice surprisingly less authoritarian. "What do you intend to do now?" "As I said, I'm establishing a foundation. I've already initiated the legal process to take full control of the assets left by Grandma as determined in her will." Emily paused. "I don't intend to create a public scandal or expose what you did. I prefer to move forward, but I want to make it clear that from now on I'll make my own decisions about my life and my assets." Catherine seemed about to protest, but Theodore placed a hand over hers, silencing her. There was something in his look, not exactly regret, but perhaps a reluctant recognition that the daughter they had underestimated for so long had finally assumed her own power. "And what about the Vanderbilt group?" he asked pragmatically. "You still have responsibilities to the family business." "I'll fulfill my obligations as a shareholder," assured Emily. "But my main focus will be my writing and the foundation, and I hope that over time you can respect my choices, even if you don't fully understand them." After her parents' departure, Emily felt an exhaustion that was both physical and emotional, but also a sense of liberation that she had never experienced before. Andrew enveloped her in his arms, holding her close without words, simply offering the comfort of his presence. "It was harder than I imagined," she finally confessed. "You were amazing," he replied, gently kissing her forehead. "Firm, clear, but also compassionate. I don't know if I could have been so balanced in your place." Emily smiled weakly. Years of repression taught me to control my emotions in public, but now, her voice faltered, and the tears she had held back during the entire confrontation finally came, not from sadness or anger, but from relief. The relief of finally freeing herself from the suffocating expectations that had defined her life for so long. The next morning, Emily woke up with a feeling of lightness that she hadn't known since childhood. Beside her, Andrew was still sleeping deeply. She observed his relaxed face, mentally tracing the lines she had learned to love, the determined curve of his jaw, the small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes that appeared when he smiled, the almost imperceptible scar on his forehead, a reminder of the accident that had brought them closer. How unpredictable life was, she thought. She had entered that marriage expecting, at best, a cordial partnership based on mutual interests. Instead, she had found true love, a partner who saw her completely, with her strengths and fragilities, and loved her not despite her peculiarities, but because of them. Andrew opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "Good morning," he murmured, sleepily. "How long have you been awake?" "A few minutes," she replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. "I was thinking about how life takes strange turns." He agreed, pulling her closer. "Wonderfully strange turns." Later that day, Emily received a call from the Lighthouse Institute. It was Mrs. Josephine, inviting her to a special event the following week. A small presentation where the children would share projects developed in the cultural workshops. "Lily is especially anxious to show the book she wrote," informed the director. "She dedicated it to you, you know." Emily felt an unexpected emotion at that information. "I'll be there without fail," she promised. On the day of the event, Emily and Andrew arrived at the Institute with time to spare. The small presentation would be held in the garden, where chairs had been arranged in a semicircle, and a simple table served as an improvised stage. Lily ran to them as soon as she spotted them, hugging Emily with enthusiasm. "You came. I have something to show you." The girl dragged Emily by the hand to a side table where various projects were displayed: paintings, clay sculptures, music scores written by hand. Among them, a small handcrafted book stood out, carefully bound with a cardboard cover decorated with colorful drawings. "This is my book," announced Lily proudly. "Mrs. Josephine helped me bind it, but I wrote everything myself and did the illustrations." Emily picked up the book with reverence, opening it to find pages filled with Lily's careful handwriting and simple but expressive drawings. The title, written in large and decorated letters on the first page, said, "The Girl Who Found Her Voice." "It's about a girl who couldn't speak because an evil wizard stole her voice," explained Lily as Emily flipped through the pages. But then she discovers she can communicate by writing stories, and her stories become so powerful that they end up breaking the spell. Emily felt a lump in her throat. The analogy was simple but deeply touching. "It's a beautiful story, Lily." The girl smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Look at the dedication," she whispered conspiratorially. On the page after the title, Lily had written in her best handwriting, "For Emily, who taught me that my stories matter." The tears that Emily had been holding back finally escaped. She hugged the girl tightly, unable to express in words how much that simple gesture meant to her. Andrew, who was observing the scene from a few steps away, approached and placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, discreetly wiping away the tears. "More than okay," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "I think I just understood something very important." That night, as they returned home after the presentation, where Lily's book had received enthusiastic applause from everyone present, Emily shared her epiphany with Andrew. "I always thought that family was something given to us, an accident of birth that defined who we were and what we should become. But today I realize that family is also something we can choose, something we build through connections based on a genuine respect and affection." Andrew nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's why I felt more at home today, sitting on those plastic chairs in the Institute's garden, than at any formal dinner at my parents' mansion." "Exactly," agreed Emily. And you know what else I realized? That perhaps the true purpose of my grandmother's inheritance wasn't just to give me financial independence, but to allow me to discover who I really am and what I truly value in life. "And who are you, Emily Vanderbilt Mitchell?" asked Andrew, with an affectionate smile. Emily reflected for a moment before answering. "I'm a writer, a mentor, a woman who has finally found her own voice. And," she added, intertwining her fingers with his, "I'm someone who has learned that sometimes the best beginnings emerge from the most unlikely arrangements." Andrew brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. "I think we both discovered that." When they arrived home, a surprise awaited Emily. On the living room table, there was a package wrapped in simple paper. Inside, she found a first edition of The Awakening by Kate Chopin, a rare and valuable literary treasure. The card accompanying the book, written in Andrew's elegant handwriting, simply said, "To my wife, who taught me that true love isn't arranged, it's discovered. With all my heart, Andrew." Emily hugged the book against her chest, observing the man who had entered her life as part of a commercial agreement and had become the center of her world. The marriage that had begun as an obligation had transformed into the greatest freedom she had ever known, the freedom to be authentically herself, loved not despite her particularities but because of them. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of everything that didn't need to be said between